presented by Centris Federal Credit Union. That's DB. I'm Ravi. Lulla. We are joined now by our friend Tim Verghese from inside Nebraska. Tim, what's going on, man?
Hey, not too much. Doing well. Good. It's been a good week down here in San Antonio.
TV, you got to be right in your stinking wheelhouse, just nerding out, taking notes, right? Like, is that like
that's Candyland for Tim Verghese?
Yeah, man. Whoa, different Candyland.
Yeah, it's been a blast, and like, yeah, we've had a couple drop. Like, there was a couple of quarterbacks I wanted to see that didn't ultimately show, but I mean, today's the combine. I'm heading over there here after this, and that's we've got 600 guys underclassmen coming, so I'm just going to be there all day taking notes. That's my wheelhouse.
Man, that Ravi was over here, Ravi Unchained here with the whole Candyland reference. I'm gonna get this thing back on track here at TV. Some interesting stuff going on. You're watching a lot of the guys, and I want to start with Cortez Mills because a lot of these guys on staff that are very familiar, the Phil Simpsons of the world that I've had a chance to, kind of sit and talk upside, explosiveness, and competitiveness with Cortez Mills. In that order, what has impressed you the most as he continues to stack days?
Yeah, it's like the competitiveness is there. Like that fire is there. The personality is there. Like I talk to him, and I just get the same feelings I did talking to Ja'Cory Barney in the spring of just like, oh, this kid's a competitor. This kid really wants it, and I feel like it's going to be hard to leave that type of kid off the field. And then, yeah, I mean, you watching the play this week, he's making up for lost time in a way just because he missed like more than half of his senior year because of injury. So he went out to this Dade showcase a couple of weeks ago, had a really good week there, but that was against just local South Florida talent, which, as we know, it's a good group of talent, but it wasn't like national level talent. Now he's here, and he's running routes hard every single play. Like what's impressed me over the past 2 days is, in 11 on 11, he's not the one getting the ball, but he's running his route all the way through. He's making sure, he's still getting open and kind of pushing through when others, it's an all-star scenario. A lot of these guys are early enrollees. They're not going 100% necessarily. Christian Jones and Cortez Mills, both those guys, like the effort they've showed this week has really impressed because both those guys aren't just here just to be all Americans. They're here to kind of like prove themselves a little bit. And Cortez told me yesterday he wants to prove that he's the best receiver in the country, and he's doing a good job of like making his case for it.
Yeah, I like the Christian Jones thing just because there's two things that I always talk about with him. Number one, he's a higher level thinker, so like concepts aren't going to really be a problem for him. Now, turning himself loose to play fast within those concepts maybe, but that'll happen with time. But the other thing is he doesn't miss reps. His ability to be available every day at a high level without having to always be spectacular is eventually going to pan out for him because he shows up. He's steady Eddie. He shows up every day.
Yeah. And for him, like this week was not about, kind of proving himself or any of that. Like there wasn't any like big boxes he had to check. It was ultimately just how he stacks up against this level of competition. I know talking to national evaluators down here and talking to some coaches down here, they really just wanted to see because, the Class A competition in Nebraska has improved, no doubt, and he's faced some future Power 4 talent.
But they probably want to see him flash more, right? Because he does so many of the little things without, like, eye-popping stuff.
Right, and also you just wanted to see, like, okay, how does it look when he's taking on blocks from 6'4" to 6'6", 300-plus pound offensive tackles, guys that are going to Penn State, Notre Dame, and all these different programs. And then you see kind of watching him in coverage a little bit too. You like the zone drops. You're watching him against other linebackers in individual drills. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can tell the wide receiver background's there because he's catching balls that some of these other guys are struggling to get hands on.
Tim, before we get to Nebraska here, I want to ask a little non-Nebraska question with your All-American experience. Outside of Cortez and Christian Jones, is there somebody you've just had eyes on that maybe doesn't get a ton of national pub that you've just been super impressed with?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's an individual name I've loved out here. I'll say one I've loved, and I think I think he's a top 50 guy by most every rankings recruiting, but I don't think he gets talked about enough. Eric Winters, he's headed to Auburn. He's a safety, can also play linebacker. I love that kid. He flies around from the safety position. He held up in one-on-one coverage against Jamie French, who's a 5-star heading to Texas, one of the best receivers in the country.
What are his real measurables, TV?
Sorry?
What are his real measurables?
I believe he came in at 6'1", right around 200.
Okay. He looks longer than that.
Yeah. I think there's some good length. I don't have his wingspan off the top of my head, but I do believe he's got a good wing. And yeah, I mean, the big question with him kind of coming into this week, and what I wanted to see is there is this like question about his long-term projection. Is he a linebacker? Is he a safety? After seeing him today or this week, I think you can play him at safety and he can just be like a more physically developed safety, like a guy that comes in. You don't need to pack a whole lot of weight on him. You kind of just let him roam in the back end of the defense because he can hit, he can cover, he can do all the little things you want at the safety position. I really liked him. And then another one I'll mention, Khalid Lockett, another one that has some national attention, is a 5-star by some other ranking services, but that kid just does a lot of the things right. You know, there's some elite receivers down here, some guys that, you know, maybe rank higher, maybe bigger, maybe faster, but he runs routes at an exceptionally high level, does a really good job at the point of attack, and you know, I just think he does a good job separating as well. I think he's next up at Texas.
Tim, as we kind of shift gears here from the All-American events over to what Nebraska's been doing in the transfer portal, obviously picked up another couple commits this week at against some key spots. Are you surprised at all, considering how many guys they have in that secondary, how aggressive they've been with the defensive backs in the portal class?
It's corners.
Yeah, been a little surprised, especially, you know, with the you know, kind of especially recently, the last 2 weeks or so, the idea that Deshaun Singleton could potentially return. Ultimately, you know, it's on Singleton to decide what he wants, but I mean, the idea that you could potentially get Singleton back plus all of these DBs. I mean, my read on the situation right now is that it's going to be open competition here in the spring. And, you know, there's going to be some people that it's going to be like the NFL minicamp. It's going to be one of those things where it's like, hey, at the end of the spring, or even towards the end of spring, because the way the window works, towards the end of spring ball, they're going to have some tough sit-down conversations with a few DBs in that room and being like, hey, you know, you're not going to be on this roster in the fall. So you're going to have to, you know, enter that portal and decide what's next. Like, that's just kind of where we're at right now. And I think John Butler and Addison Williams wanted that infusion. We talked so much in the season on the athletic deficiency they kind of had in the secondary. I think they wanted some good athletes. I think they've gone out and found some good athletes. And it's an interesting mix of like guys that can play some safety, guys that can play some corner, guys that have playing experience and starting experience, like long-term starting experience versus, you know, like Marquise Gross-Kilbrew has 1 real year of experience across 3 schools, but the 1 year is really good. And then you look at a guy like Andrew Marshall, who's been pretty consistent, has played well, you know, is a guy that, you know, you feel good about, you know, potentially starting down the line. And then you've got Justin Rhett, who hasn't played a whole lot at Georgia. And there's a big question on, like, how far along is he in his development? And, you know, is he a guy that sticks around in Nebraska, or is he like a 1 semester and done? I think there's a chance. I'll say this right now with some of these transfers too. I think there's a chance like 2-3 plus transfers coming in are potentially 1 semester and done type guys.
100%. 100%. I think you're spot on. I think it will be like this. I think there will be extensive tryouts, like especially at the cornerback spots where you want a little flexibility. But I think that's good insight on your part. Just, you know, kind of processing
like
through
Damon,
it out loud.
like I wonder a little bit too, like because I thought Donovan Jones was a safety this whole time.
Yeah.
Him playing in that bowl game and playing as well as he did, like what wrench does that throw in now to like the cornerback position and cornerback depth? Because that's a name I just kind of expected to slot into the safety rotation, and now it's like, okay, well, who slides back to safety? Who makes up that number?
So I think for him, and good on him. I think for him, what started was he was always going to be the corner in their dime stuff, especially when BC used 2 tight ends. And Nebraska wanted to be a little bigger still on the perimeter because BC quietly had 2 pretty good tight ends. And I think what happened was the way that the game was going, kind of the field, his mentality. I just think they went with toughness and competitiveness, right? Like he'll figure it out on the go, but he was practicing outside the numbers for a while. So it wasn't like, oh, let's just try him at corner. It was just in some of their smaller specialty packages. So as he continued to flourish, I think they rode the hot hand, and they've shown. That's why I like the competitive thing and kind of this on the fly trial, because what they've shown is they'll give you, and I get it with some of the safeties. You're going to be like, well, they didn't do that with the safeties. They just let those guys play. But with the cornerback spots in particular, they'll go hot hands and they'll let you play your way into or out of it outside the numbers. Right? We saw Jeremiah Charles start against UCLA. And like how it went. They make it this like we've seen it with Amari. We've seen it with guys where it's kind of like, okay, let's see where we're at, and if we like it, we'll stay with it. If not, next man up. Like corner will be highly competitive.
For sure. And that's a room that you want competitors there. Like you want guys that have that, like you mentioned, you kind of want guys with that attitude, and guys that are willing to compete. So if it's like you go into spring and you see anyone kind of ducking out of the competition, like that should tell you a lot, because that just tells you about their makeup as well, because this is a position where you need to be competitive snap to snap.
Well, and remember, we had Amari, JJ, and Bly. And it's kind of like not an afterthought, but it's that just to my point about you better be stacking good weeks to stay in the mix is kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because now we're not even really like Jeremiah Charles was potentially a budding star, and he still could be. He's highly talented. But what we never get to see, or what we don't know, Tim, what I think they're trying to find is those guys that show up and compete and stack days every single day. Like that's going to be the thing with these guys. It doesn't matter what the spot is, right? I said this, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on like Ty Robinson and some of these guys that are leaving. We'll say, oh, those guys are hard to replace. And I'm in my head, I'm thinking the work output. Can those guys match the work output that some of these guys show every day? And if they do, that'll give them a chance. Like, can you match Sierra Wright's work output? Like, he's a fantastic practice player. Ja'Cory Barney is a fantastic practice player. So as these guys start to pop, they become like the fluid benchmark of what you're expected day in, day out. You know what I mean? That's what's really happening, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think again the like you mentioned with Ty and Nash too, like the proof is in the pudding of like, they can just point and say like, look how these guys improved just with consistent effort and practice and that competitive mindset. And yeah, it'll work out. Like I think ultimately, we're all kind of hinting at. I think all of this competition ultimately will be better for the team in 2025. It's just going to lead to a couple uncomfortable conversations in the spring, a couple names people maybe didn't expect, or people expected to stick around with this program for the long haul, maybe won't be with the program anymore. Like it's going to be an uncomfortable period here in the spring, but
I agree.
The team I think will ultimately be better for it come, August.
Tim, it's funny you bring that up, because as we're having that conversation, as you and DB are talking, I'm thinking, all of that's great. And I think that's the best way to put a team together. I think it's really hard. I think it's a lot harder to stomach that in 2025 when you have the social media aspect of, well, wait, this guy just got here, and oh, he was so highly touted, and then you're gonna have some guys.
We got to change too. That's a good point.
You're gonna have some guys, like you said, Tim, kind of fall by the wayside. That is just nothing necessarily wrong with them, but they weren't at the top of the group, and they're going to move on with the roster limit.
And that's kind of what you're saying, right? TV, you're like, I'm just saying, like,
there's going to be some
guys might be in and out. Like, I like how you're kind of.
There's going to be some names that people are mad are gone.
He's giving us a soft landing already,
right? That it's like, well, we had the competition and they didn't cut it, like, right? Like that's kind of what we're saying.
Right, exactly. Because, like, and especially now, like, Nebraska, you look at the takes they're making in the transfer portal. You look at some of the swings they took in high school recruiting. It wasn't their intention. If it was up to Matt Rhule and his staff, he'd like to keep all of these guys on the roster. But with the 105 roster limit, this spring, it's kind of like you can bring a guy on and say, hey, you got to earn it in the spring. Like you got to earn this spot in the spring. Like we're going to bring you on for now. And you've got, the semester here with us, but you really got to earn it, and we'll help you find a landing spot if it doesn't work out here, but you got to come in here. And if you want to stick around in this program, like you have to earn that spot, and you have to beat out this guy, all competitive athletes that, have either been in the program longer or, have high-end athleticism. You have to beat these guys to stick around. And so, again, looking at this group right now, the transfer group, Marquise Groves Killebrew, I think is one that, had a really good year. And depending on the player Nebraska gets, which version of him they get, he's a guy that we could potentially see starting in the fall. Or he's a guy that comes to Nebraska with, on his fourth school in 4 years, sees the competition in the room, does his best in the competition, but if he fades or if he falls out of the two deep or one of those things, he could wind up back in the portal. And Justin Rhett, from Georgia, another one that we don't know what he is. He's not played in 2 years. And so if he comes to practice and it's like, oh, it's come together for him, it's really starting to come together for him. He's flying around. He's triggering well from the safety spot. It's like, oh, shit, okay, well, Nebraska has a guy they didn't expect was at this level. But there's also a chance that, it still hasn't really come together for him. The light isn't there. And he has to have some uncomfortable conversations and reassess where he is in terms of his development and, where he should be playing football next year because, it may not be at the Power 4 level.
Yeah, I think handling rigor is a real thing. I think that's one component that they would really, really want to up. It's already kind of competitive. It's rigor. Can you show up every single day at X level is what I want to see. And let me ask you something along those lines, TV. I've been asking guys, we keep talking about who's coming and development, and is it quick fix versus development? Because Nebraska's up to what in the portal edition? 16?
16 yesterday.
Yeah. And I was still glad to hear last night they talked Notre Dame having 13 as a small number. So I was like, oh, okay, we're still in the neighborhood. But of the guys that are back, okay, that are already in the fold, if TV gets his druthers and you want to use a development poster child to catapult the program, who develops, in your opinion, as say, hey, look, see what they've done with this guy if Nebraska wants to be where they want to be in 2025?
I would say I think you could point to a couple offensive linemen, guys that have been with the program for a bit and have been working with Donovan Raiola. I could go anywhere from, Gunnar Gatula taking a step up and potentially, locking down the tackle position. We could talk about, Grant Bricks potentially taking that leap and entering the starting lineup, whether that's a tackle or a guard. Defensively, and it's somewhat cheating a little bit because we didn't see them on the field this year. I think it's really important that Vincent Shavers and Willis McGahee take steps forward, take big steps forward this spring. Like you can't have with both of those guys. I don't think you can really afford to have a sophomore tapering off, kind of like what we saw with Cam Leonard and Prince Will this past season. I think those guys need to step up into bigger roles and also step up as players to meet those bigger roles. And so it's cheating a little bit because we've only seen 1 year of those guys, and we did see those guys on the field. But those are two guys that I think, and again, if Nebraska is able to play those guys and those guys play well, Nebraska can take and point to those two guys, go into South Florida and say, look what we did with Vincent Shavers, who Miami just decided last minute they didn't want anymore. Look what we did with Willis McGahee, who none of the schools down here were really serious about until he started doing some stuff in Nebraska. Like, come to Nebraska and get developed like these guys and see the field like these guys. Like, that'll give them some real recruiting power down in South Florida.
All right. So I, because you let me spend too much time in my own head, I can easily flip. So yesterday, TV, I was talking to Brunts, and I was like, who I would make that person? I'd make it Dylan Raiola. And it's weird to start with one of your better players, but I'm like, ooh, if he got in like elite level fitness and really started to sharpen up, took that leap, like that would really springboard the program. And then some other guys started coming up with some names. And so there's three along the D line So I'll give you Raiola, Keona Davis, Riley Van Poppel, Elijah Judy. Is there a guy of those four where if he develops the way you think Nebraska wants to play could be the catalyst?
I mean, it's hard not to say Dylan just because it's Dylan. And because of the fact that, if Nebraska gets a serious step forward from him with these receivers.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. I mean, it would. Yeah. If he takes a next step and gets closer to the expectations we kind of had for him out of high school, that's a big deal for Nebraska. And then I think second in that group, just in terms of if you want to point to development, I mean, Riley Van Poppel could be one hell of a story just because he's a guy that out of Argyle in Texas was seen as like an offensive lineman / defensive lineman. No one really knew where to put him. He was kind of just like fringe 3-star. By some people had him at a 4-star. To come to Nebraska, to buy into the vision the staff had for him, to be able to redshirt as technically, in his second year with the program after playing as a freshman, adding the weight, doing what he needs to do in the locker room, and completely turning into a different player than he was in high school. Like, I mean, not even like a different looking player, but a different player. He was an end in high school. He was a guy that was winning, kind of all over the line. And you're talking about a guy that's now expected to step up and fill Ty Robinson's role. If he can do that, if he gets out there and he proves to be just this like big body that can be moved up a spot, that can get the pressures on the quarterback, that defends the run really well. I mean, that's that's development. That's okay. Hey, Terry Bradden, you've earned your money. Terrence Knighton, look what you obviously contributed to this as well. Nebraska and Matt Rhule can kind of go around to defensive linemen across the country and say, hey, we can develop you into this. And look at the run we've had now between Nash, Ty, sending Jamari Butler off to LSU, sending Princeville off to Ole Miss. Like, even if it goes guys transferring up and getting a bag, that stuff still matters. You still get to claim those guys as you developed and help those guys find the spots they did.
That would be, you know what else is funny listening to you talk about Riley with his personality? He loves Nebraska. So I think like poster child sales pitch too in that regard, because when the more he gets behind the mic, I think the more Nebraska fans are going to fall in love with him. He absolutely loves Nebraska.
Yeah, and he's got a chance to stick around here and become a fan favorite for, the next 2-3 potentially seasons.
That's our guy, Tim Verghese, inside Nebraska. Tim, enjoy your time at the All-American Bowl, and we will talk to you again next week.
Yes, sir. Sounds good. Y'all have a good weekend.
Thanks, TV. Be safe.
That's our guy, Tim Verghese, inside Nebraska. What's up?
Have you flipped on your development guy?
Well, I mean, I said this.
It was yours RVP originally? Or
no,
did you
mine was Keona.
Oh, Davis.
Yeah. But that was more of like a guy that I thought could be in that conversation more than I was convicted on.
So the first time in 24 hours, somebody brought up, now Gatula, could you get me off my spot? That's interesting. That would be a heck of a story.
It would be a heck of a story, but this sounds weird. If he had the exact same year he has this year, I'm fine.
Oh, I got you.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I will say, Raiola is the one where if he takes that leap, almost nothing else matters. It really doesn't.